Good morning. My name is George Lambert, and I'm President and CEO of the Greater Washington Urban League. And good morning. I'm delighted to welcome you to the 2023 Greater Washington Urban League Equity in Black and White Series, Trust in Equity. It is our great pleasure to have you join us today. We are continuing our series of programming designed as a response to the question, what can we do? Truthfully, I think it is time that we stop asking questions and begin making statements. Every day, we're witnessing the blatant dismantling of progress in civil rights and equity through aggressive legislation by conservative bodies, which is a direct threat to all of the work that has been done. What we are witnessing amounts to the criminalization of our culture, which leads to a feeling of devaluation, a sense of invisibility inside corporate America and in daily life. Black legislators Justin Jones and Justin Pearson from the state legislature of Tennessee, the removal of AP African American history courses deemed to have no value by the governor of Florida, and the constant and relentless attack on civil and voting rights are just a few examples of a disturbing trend threatening us all. This is precisely what brings us together today. We must act with a sense of urgency. Diversity, equity, and inclusion has proven to be an asset for successful businesses, while it has been shown to strengthen organizations by enabling people of color to make important contributions. There is a perception by those who oppose D&I efforts that marginalized groups are given an unfair advantage. I got to tell you, nothing could be further from the truth. While we have identified and aligned with ourselves with many allies, we must do the necessary follow-up to verify their efforts as genuine. It is important that we hold leadership accountable to ensure we arrive at true trust in equity. We are fortunate to have foremost industry thought leaders to share ideas and practices that must employ so that we can reach trust that we seek. One of the main goals of today's conference is to spark honest thought about D&I efforts in your organization and how we can convert the thoughts and ideas shared today to reform and to change. We can't do any of the work that we do without the support from one of our generous sponsors. Our host today has led a very accomplished life with careers both in law and in entertainment. She co-hosts the late-night talk show, State of Culture on Revolt TV. She also co-hosted a talk show on WABC Radio in New York City and was a co-host on Fox News. In October of 2020, she was cast as the first African-American member of the Real Housewives of New York City. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our host this evening, or this morning, I should say, Ebony K. Williams. Ebony.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lambert. And just good morning to each of you. I really want to tell you how good it does my heart to see all of these beautiful Black faces on a Friday morning here in the Mecca right? Washington, D.C. It's very important. I want to say thank you to the Greater Washington Urban League and to the National Urban League for us to have this opportunity to have a very important conversation. I also want to just take a moment to define equity. We are here at Equity in Black and White. And I think it's important that we don't take for granted a mutual understanding of what equity means. Typically, when we talk about this work historically, we've used the term equality. And when you know better, you do better. What we know about equality is it presumes exact same proportionality to all people. What equity does is it elevates the concept and says that we're not all starting from the same points in life, right? There's a lot of historical circumstances that have created dynamics between various groups of Americans to be going about the journey of navigating the American dream from different positions. Amen?
Amen.
Amen. So therefore, we have to have equity that makes the allocations and the adjustments so that we can certainly have both a fair and just opportunity to achieve. So with that framing, again, good morning and welcome. Recent events in Black America's community have caused us to re-examine the relationships that we have with various organizations and corporations. We know that this is very familiar and not new at all to Black America. Some horrific incidents, and that's really putting it quite mildly, have informed the way in which we have to look at this work differently today. We have to protest unfair treatment, and we must call it out. It becomes more than a social issue, it becomes a just cause. The people that we align ourselves with, they say a lot of things and they make a lot of promises. But we have got to ask ourselves and hold them to account who is really for Black America. We have been forced to distinguish the kinds of support that we get. There's something we call performative allyship, but we need to look deeper and see, is it really credible relationship building? Is it rooted in trust? Performative allyship, that's when people claim to be of alignment with us as a people and as a cause. But when you look underneath the hood, the efforts don't match the words. Trust building, on the other hand, finds that the supposed ally is matching their verbiage with their actions and our advancement. In this morning's first segment, we're going to outline the identifiers that we all need to look at when we're helping to identify organizations as we make decisions and distinguish who's performative and who's authentic in trust-building relationships. Who is giving us an ROI? Who is giving us a return on our investment as Black Americans? Today, it is my honor to introduce to you two phenomenal visionaries and leaders. They've been providing award-winning strategies and powerful perspectives inside and outside of corporate America regarding diversity and inclusion and equity. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the owner and CEO of Be Equitable, Michael Leslie Amilcar, and Global Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Leader and Senior Communications Counselor, Ms. Trish Smith.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning, beauties. Okay, so I want to start, Michael, I'll start with you.
Sure.
We're talking about performative allyship and distinguishing it from something that's genuine. When you make that distinction in your work, what do you look for?
I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you for the way that you led this conversation, because I look for the 3 C's. You know, I look for character, and that is about, are you leading from values? I look for commitment. And commitment isn't what you said, is I'm going to do something, but then don't follow through. And I look for consistency. And so are we consistently, not just when it's in the news or when it seems to be everyone else is doing it, but am I consistently supporting the communities that I say on an ongoing basis? And that's what we look for in organizations. And we hold leaders accountable. We like to say, you know, we think about organizations as some, you know, like it's an edifice, like it's not made up of people. It is people that are leading in these organizations. And we want to go to the top, and we want to say who has the positions of power and authority, who has access to budgets, who's making decisions about more than just, you know, who gets hired and who gets advanced, but decisions about where you're contributing in the community, who you're using as supplier vendors, and are you paying them? And so I leave it there.
Yeah, are you paying them? That's a word, entire ministry. Okay, Trish, I do want to talk about consequences. The reality is when corporations or organizations avail themselves to opportunity, and we need to be honest about what the benefits of appearing to be an ally of Black America look like. And then there's disappointment around the follow through. What do you advise in your work to be what a consequence of that type of performance could look like?
So firstly, good morning. Thank you again so much for the opportunity. And I already feel like I'm in church of like-minded spirits
Amen.
this morning. There are many consequences, and Edelman has done a host of research reports on the consequences related to not being a diverse, equitable, and inclusive organization, and doing that consistently, as Michael stated, not just when it's on the front page of the news, or not just when you have consumers making the demand, but day in and day out within your organization and externally, because it's not only what you do within your walls, but also what you do within the communities of which your customers and employees are a part. There are several consequences. We know from our research that individuals are making choices about where they'll work or where they'll remain an employee based upon the positions that organizations take, based upon the actions that reinforce those statements and those stated commitments. We also know consumers are making choices about what they'll buy or boycott based upon, right, what companies are doing or not doing. We know that investors are looking at issues surrounding social impact and support of diverse communities, Black America, as a result or as one of the criteria for their investments. So there's several consequences, not only that you may have one or two employees that may raise a voice, but your customers may no longer buy your product or buy your services. You actually have your investors who are now deciding if they're going to invest in you or continue to. And you have a workforce who's saying, I will or I won't remain, will not remain working for this organization if you don't show me that you truly care about the issues that matter to me and my family and my community. So the consequences are severe.
Indeed. Let me ask you, Michael, we have to name this. In your work, tell us a couple of examples of where you have seen the words not match the actions. Tell us some examples of where you've witnessed the performance of allyship.
Well, we started with talking about what happened when George Floyd was murdered. And there was all of this money that was going to be committed to organizations. And we know clients who said it, and still, this many years later, very little, if any, money has actually made it. And we choose to work with clients who are really committed to advancing. Now, you might be here and you might want to go there, but we're not in this check the box. It's like you really have to be, it's not even where you are, but you have to have the real commitment to be moving towards equity from an outcomes-based. So it's not activity-based, but outcome-based. There's a lot of examples, sadly, where we actually, because we work with corporate organizations, who are looking to really change the representation internally. They're looking to have equity in terms of pay equity. They're having cultural assessments and cultural audits done to really determine, what is the pulse of the people who are leaving.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, this next generation, millennials and Gen Z, they're not having it. They're speaking up with their voice. And so we do have, sometimes we work with diversity leads and diversity teams who have the passion themselves, and then we get in there and the CEO and the C-suite do not, and the board do not. And so it really does start from the top. And so if, like what I said about character, if this isn't in your values as a leader, and I'll say that we've seen examples where that's been the case, where we have seen that the CEO can speak extemporaneously on topics of diversity and equity and not from a script. So those are the things that tell you, that whether it's real or whether it's simply something that they're doing so that they can keep going on to whatever the next business need is that they see.
I'm going to piggyback on that. I think one of the things that we've been seeing is that even when the CEO is not just talking the talk, but truly committed, supporting it with action, and there for the long haul, that if that doesn't trickle down throughout the organization, to those line managers, to the individuals who are leading teams day in and day out, it still is ineffective.
That's true.
And so it really has to be top down and bottom up. It has to be a holistic transformation that we're looking to make with inside organizations to really cause the effect and have the greatest impact that we're seeking to do. So that's one thing I've marveled at that over the last 4 years. I've met with some amazingly committed leaders who are doing transformational work, and it does not penetrate throughout the organization.
I couldn't agree more. And the other thing is we do focus on people, and people are important. People are who make up the organization. But I say trust doesn't live in people, it lives in systems. Show me a system. And the reason why we focus on leaders, because leaders have the control and power to change systems.
That's exactly right.
And so let's systematize equity.
Yes.
So that we're not just having a particular person who leads supplier diversity who actually has a caring for it, and that person transitions and then all of a sudden it's gone. Let's put it in our policies and in our guidelines and in our protocols that this is how we commit to equity.
Well, and that's true equality, right? That's the justice that we're seeking. When you look at inequality, equality, equity, justice is dismantling the systems that created the inequity from the start.
Well, I was going to say, we know it takes systems to remedy it because we know the systems that created it from the foundational aspects of our nation, right? These were not siloed, isolated efforts to subordinate blackness in America. These were whole constitutions, whole state-driven policy, right? So we know it's got to come from a systemic place. Before we move on, I do want to share an anecdote from the EKW files. That's what I call my life story. I was recently working with a global organization, partnering with them with one of my many roles. And I was experiencing some very obvious, very visible, highly visible anti-blackness, unfortunately. And unfortunately, we know that happens almost on a daily basis. But this was, and I have a pretty high temperament for my ability to remedy that in my own capacity, but this had just gotten to the place where I needed this organization to show up for me. I needed them to have my back. And I was on a call with some very C-suite level leaders, and it got a bit contentious because as I was pleading with them to show up for me, to help create a safe opportunity for me to continue to do the work that we agreed to do, I was told, well, this is the nature of the job, Ebony, and essentially you have to woman up for yourself. I said, this is very interesting feedback from the same organization that not 1 year ago, at this point of this conversation, had a lot of black squares on Instagram.
That's right.
And we're talking a whole lot about amplifying black voices and making sure that your staff, talent, and crew felt protected in the workplace. And matter of fact, let me run it back. Let me go to Instagram and pull it up for you. And I said, and I would hate to believe that another black man in America must be slaughtered in the streets in broad daylight on camera for you to deliver on this very promise you made to me and to Black America. And it was silence, right? And I know that sounds, what's the word? It was a bit assertive on my part. But you know,
let's not apologize for that.
Yeah.
You know, let's not. You talked about what performative allyship. One sign that it's performative is when we're doing it to feel good about ourselves, when we're doing it to impress, and we're not really centering the persons or the communities that are being impacted. So if all you're doing is putting a black square on social media or saying on social media that you're doing something, that's not enough. And as a matter of fact, I prefer you not do that. Or we get this, or you're tagging everyone black or brown that you know in the post so that they can sort of co-sign that you're a good person. You know, this is performative, and we need to be talking with money, because it's about economics.
Yeah.
You know, so what I say is in the organization is that corporations are a business, they are about making money, and if we could only do one thing, we want you to be equitable in all the ways that you can be. But if you want to go to one laser issue, it's about economics. So it isn't just about representation we want representation shared at all levels of power because economics is the system that we're in. And I don't apologize for wealth building as well, you know, because I figure economics and well-being in my hands is going to go into my community, and it's going to serve the places and organizations that I hold dear. And I think we should be thinking more strategically about that and working together for that. And I love that passion that you had. Let's bring it.
It's the lack of accountability that has allowed companies to get to the point we're at now, nearly 4 years later, right? Or it's because we haven't held those companies to the carpet. And I don't know if you recently saw, several organizations have actually sued companies now and individuals for not meeting the laundry list of commitments that were made after May 2022 and George Floyd's murder. And so we have to continue to hold them to the fire.
Yes.
And hold them accountable for the things that they said, which in some instances it was to feel good, in others it was just because people were making them do it.
That's right.
And in others,
Right.
they might have, if we want to just give it a little grace, if we're so inclined.
Okay, I'll let you-
if we're so inclined.
I
If we're
believe
so
some.
inclined, as to if.
Yeah.
We're so inclined.
For sure, I believe some.
But then it's like you can say it when it's not hard. But when it gets hard, when you now have to disrupt your base in some capacity, right? Because that's why
Right.
it's hard, going back to the economics.
Right.
Because when you say I'm going to amplify Black voices, I'm going to pour into Black wealth building, we have to start saying the quiet part out loud, which is
right.
there's going to be another part of your consumer base that feels threatened by that.
Absolutely.
We have to name that. And so now we've got to hold these companies or organizations and government entities even. I'll give you an example of the government entity in 1 minute. I'm talking about Black farmers. Hello? I'm talking about the fact that this presidential administration, and they all do it, talk about, run on, and win on promises to say, I'm going to do right by Black American farmers. And then when they make the effort, and then sometimes they do show up and start making the effort,
Sure.
then you've got White American Farmers Association suing because America has been rooted in systemic inequity for so long that when you make the effort to systemically provide equity, it feels like discrimination. So I just want to kind of button this up with saying it's important that we do what these leaders have talked to us about today, which is name it, not apologize for it, call it out consistently. Because if this were easy, y'all, this would have been done long ago.
But let's say that it's not been easy for many of us and those who look like us for a long time.
Absolutely.
And so the perspective we try to give is when they say this is uncomfortable or this is hard, who are you centering even in that conversation? We talked about the legislation that's happening across this country, banning books. We can't say certain words. We can't talk about DEI. And I say, for whose comfort?
That's it.
Because who benefits from that? Because we're uncomfortable every day. And no one is saying that it's okay for us to be uncomfortable. And if we can bring that perspective. And so I loved your going with grace.
Yeah.
But we need to also tell the truth and say, and ask yourself, who's benefiting? That's the question we should be asking with every policy. Who's benefiting and who's not?
And who's not. Mike, I want to stay with you 1 second. Let's talk about how we educate ourselves when we all show up in good faith as leaders in Black communities and Black spaces. We can have the very best of intentions for our people and yet sometimes get it wrong in terms of the way, the support and the effort. How do we better educate ourselves as leaders on what these marginalized communities really need, what their children need, what their systems need, in ways that really serve their interests and not our own well-meaning agendas?
Yeah, we have to do our own work. I think that all of us, even those who are Black and brown, we are on a journey. I'm on a journey. I'm learning every day. And so it is really to be in allyship, and some might say even to be an accomplice, that maybe being an allyship is not far enough. But to be there is to really first learn, listen, learn, and understand. I remember we were doing a program, and so we work with a lot of corporate clients, and we work with a lot of healthcare organizations. And we were doing a program about how to really help the physician understand what's happening with maternal Black health. Do we need to go there? And it was a great question that was raised by a community leader who said, does Be Equitable, are you talking to the women? Like, are you talking to grassroots organizations? And the truth was we were doing so through third party, but not directly. And so we really had to acknowledge that we're a great organization at Be Equitable, but sometimes we've got to get out of our own, our own offices and our own privilege to say that we don't know everything that's happening in the Black community ourselves, and there's so much intersectionality. We want to really acknowledge and amplify and let people speak for themselves. Yeah. So I think that that's what you do as well. If you have power, don't speak on behalf of other people, pass the mic. Let them speak in their own voice. So if you have a platform, that's what you can do.
Trish, I'll ask you the same. How do you, in your work and in your leadership, find ways to center the authentic voices of the community versus, again, our kind of well-meaning but sometimes, parachuting in efforts?
creating forums and platforms for them to share their voice. To your point, are there systems, are there places where you can actually hear directly from individuals that may be different from you? And I love the point about, leaning in, listening, and learning. We all need to do that, because guess what? We're not a monolith either, right? There's something that all of us can learn about our community. So being active learners, leaning in to continue to learn is hugely important for organizations to create those systems where they hear from individuals, whether it's through their employee resource groups, whether it's through employee surveys, whether it's through relationships they have with organizations like the Urban League, right? That they are listening actively to hear what the community's needs are, to hear what the desires are externally, their employees internally. So you've got to do it. You can't sit in any ivory tower thinking that, or crystal ball thinking that you know what's happening, but really being open and proactive, not only when they come to you to share, but proactively seeking to learn.
Indeed. Following up on that, Trish, when we, as organizations like what you both are working with, and Urban League, and, we're all a member of, we're members of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, all of these are great bodies, ski-wee to that, these great bodies that go about the work of helping remedy and further liberate Black America, we get feedback. We got to talk about feedback. So Trish, from your perspective, how do we best get the feedback and then implement it?
So good. Firstly, you have to have individuals and resources within the organization to implement. I cannot tell you the number of clients that come to us and say, we want to do X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, okay, where's the support for it? Where's the people power? Where are the dollars? Right? And not just for 6 months that you run a campaign or program and then it's over, but again, long term, that it's consistent and ongoing. So it really does require, once you get that information, are you then prepared to do something with it? Do you have the infrastructure to support it, to really advance the change, and then to measure it? Because we know what matters gets measured, and what's measured matters. And so once you do that, you put in place the programs, the new policies, the new structures. How are you monitoring the effectiveness so that you can pivot, adjust where it's needed, and you can get to where you're really trying to go? So oftentimes people will say they want to do something, you have the most well-constructed plan, program, but it falls in implementation or execution because no one there is there to own it, to run it, to monitor it, to see in fact if it's successful. And then they say DEI programs aren't effective.
Michael, your feedback on how to implement the community feedback.
Yeah, so I have another C too. So the other C that I didn't name is capacity. You can have all the best in the world, but if you don't actually have the capacity in the people and in the resources, people call and then they say, can you do all of this? And then I have a budget that's less than their coffee budget. And I'm thinking, well, what are we thinking that we're doing here? Like, you can't make change with that in any serious initiative within a business. They're going to put the resources behind it. Feedback is really important. I do think that we do a lot of interpretation of what somebody says. And so we actually, in the data, as you said, we actually honor both analytical data, metric data, and we honor the storytelling, because we are people that come from stories. And so many organizations want to sort of dismiss, well, that's not real data. No, narrative storytelling, someone talking about their experience, we want to incorporate that because I think that sheds the light on any spreadsheet or tabulation that you do. So when we do our cultural assessments, we actually showcase the voice of the people alongside the data because I think we don't need, there's another story there. Some organizations are so focused on the data. It's almost like you don't need more data for me to look around. I see on your website you have no brown, nothing on your board of directors and your C-suite, but yet you're asking me to spend the next 3 to 6 months to tell you where you should get started. I'm not saying that it's not important to start from a place of getting data, but there's some things that we don't have to wait around to do. Like, let's just get going.
Yes, it's very interesting you say that. Speaking of, I am a storyteller, so I'm very, I just really appreciate you acknowledging the value of anecdotal, that is a data point,
That is
actually.
a data point.
People's narrative, people's stories, people's experiences are points of information to draw from if you choose, So I was interviewing some of the Black farmers on my program on the Griot, which airs every evening at 6 o'clock. Check your local listings. And this man, that's what he said to me, the leader of the Black Farmers of America. He is so tired of the government responding to their claims with studies.
Yeah.
We're going to do another study, another study, another study. When, as you say, we know where the
living it.
discrepancy
Gotta know.
is.
We're living it daily.
The evidence is there. The fact that there are, y'all are going to believe this, less than 50,000 Black farmers in America today. Less than 50,000. We come from a people
That's right.
where harvest and feeding ourselves was the bedrock
That's right.
of Black life. And now that portion of Black economic power has shrunk to a nominal number. And you're going to hit these people with another study? It's unconscionable. So I concur. Like, it's so important that we hold people to account past the data gathering. It can look like a stall tactic at some point. And let's get to the solutions. So speaking of solutions, Trish, I want to talk about long-term opportunities for sustainable change, and then also kind of acute, immediate needs. In your work, how do you approach that, which sometimes those things can be aligned, the short term and the long term, and sometimes there can be a gap there?
Sure, sure. So it's funny that you just mentioned data, because of course you come in and you do an assessment, right? As a consultant, you come in and say, where are the gaps? Where are those opportunities? And there's so many things that can be done. Of course, we know sometimes changing the representation in the room can take longer,
Yes.
right? Although I believe it can be addressed quickly in some instances, but it can take longer. But you look at that and you see, where are the short term or the lower hanging fruit opportunities, and where are those things that may take a little longer, maybe midterm or longer term. And so we come in and look at that. And some of the things that we've seen are things like, we talked about going out to the community, partnering with organizations that have a footprint and that are within the community, that actually are doing the work, right? So corporate cannot do it alone. We know from our research that actually amongst 4 institutions, government, business, nonprofits, and what am I missing?
NGOs?
Yeah.
NGOs, nonprofits, government, media.
Media. Oh.
And media
yeah.
and corporate. That corporate is the institution that is expected to do the most. That actually is placed with a responsibility based upon the respondents. Survey of several. In fact, we do this survey in 27 countries. Our trust research. This is the 24th year that we've done it. And government, is the lowest. Business is the highest.
Now think about that.
Business is the
Let's
highest.
remind ourselves, when COVID started, it wasn't the government that sent us home first.
It was business.
businesses.
It was business. Business is the highest, but we know business can't do it alone.
That's right.
Business does not have the boots on the ground, does not have the feelers in the community that are necessary. So they have to partner with NGOs, nonprofits, to actually do that work, to drive some of the change we're talking about within our communities. So there are things like that. Who do you need to be aligning with and partnering with that you can do overnight? To determine what are the issues, causes, the systemic inequities you want to address as X or Y company. And then partnering with the right organizations. That can be done overnight. Things like looking at some of your policies or ways in which you go about even interviewing, onboarding, things that you can do to change the experience that will then change the color of your organization. There's tons of things like changing, I don't know if I'm still on, it sounds like I went off. We may have one, there we go.
There we go.
Simple things like changing job descriptions, removing names from resumes. They're very small but big impact things that can be done to help in this journey. It is about creating, as we talked about, systems to share.
Yes.
So if your organization doesn't have whatever company, I'm amazed at how many companies still don't have any form of an affinity or resource group for communities to come together and share. There are things like that that are fundamental to any effective DEI program and helpful with driving that work. So I think I'm still on and you heard me there. So there's some things you can do long-term and shorter term that can help drive the work and propel you forward in the journey towards being more diverse, equitable, and inclusive.
And you brought up justice earlier, and one of the things that we don't do enough of to hold leaders accountable is we need to acknowledge harm that's been done. So many people want to get to, we're going to fix it, we're going to get here. There's a step that we're missing here. We need to acknowledge the history, acknowledge the harm. One of our clients is a major water bottler who's been taking water from indigenous lands and making profit off of it. We're going to need to acknowledge that part of your history. before we can move on to the reconciliation part, before we can move on to the representation. And to me, that's an important step, an important difference when we're talking about justice. Justice isn't we're just going to start from here and go. We're going to say there's been some things that have been done, and until this country can acknowledge the harm, I think we are putting too much on organizations to be able to start that, but there's things that we can do.
I think we have to really spend some time with what you're talking about right now, Michael, because globally, whether you're talking about South Africa's handling of apartheid, whether you're talking about Rwanda's handling of their own genocide, whether you're talking about Tulsa, Oklahoma, handling of the Tulsa massacre some 100 years ago. They always get to the reconciliation, but first comes the truth. Truth and reconciliation trials. Truth and reconciliation monuments. We're talking about Nazi Germany.
Who acknowledges what happened through statues and through
Trials. There is a tribunal where people must come forward publicly. You know, we have a saying in the culture now, when the public's disrespect, so does the apology have to be.
That's right.
Right? And we have to acknowledge, name, and articulate the truth of the rupture before we can have the audacity to think about a repair.
Right.
And for the life of me, I mean, we could speculate, but that it might go. I just got back from India just last week, from Mumbai and Ahmedabad, and I won't go into all of the details, but that was another through line. No matter where I go in this world, I am seeing a consistent effort when communities globally are serious about getting to the restoration or the reconciliation. They understand that the order is essential. They always start with truth. But for some reason, our beloved America has really got a hard time with the truth part of our reconciliation process. And until we remedy that, I just believe we're going to be stuck until we get ready to tell the truth. And so, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we have to talk about it. When we're seeing legislation in state bodies and national bodies look to erase the elements of truth-telling when it comes to America's history, I think we eradicate the opportunity for the actual reconciliation. And I think that that's really something that we have to start being really honest about.
For sure.
As we conclude, I do want to talk about intersectionality. The reality is, just like all communities, Black Americans often carry multiple identities. We are Black, we are women, we are queer, we are first generation.
And Latina.
We are Latina, we are Muslim, we are Jewish, we are all of the beautiful things. So let's talk, I'll start with you, Michael. How in the work that you do you lift up and make opportunity for multiple identities and the intersectionality of the equity?
And the first is acknowledging it. Is to acknowledge, and there is visible and there's invisible. And so it really is the listening part. And also understanding that affinity, as you were mentioning, is really, you allow that person to speak for themselves, you know? So you don't want to over-assume where someone's identities are. And so we allow that to come forward. But intersectionality is so important. I'm doing my work, we should all be doing our work to find out what we don't know. And so so you know, me in this work, maybe you have this experience too. All my friends call me and say, what should I say? What should I do? I'm having this issue, you know? But let me just give you something real practical that I think that you can do as an ally, especially in intersectional. So here I am with my boys in the Black barbershop, okay? And I'm the only woman presenting in there, and they're having a good old conversation, and they're saying, the conversation turns to LGBTQ and queerness. And so one powerful thing that I think that everyone, and I am committed to be an ally to the trans community, to the LGBTQ community, but I don't have to give a speech, I don't have to give it. All I simply said was, and me and the barber are real good friends, I said, I have a different point of view. And didn't say anything else after that. Only because sometimes being an ally is just simply not being silent if you actually do have a different point of view. It doesn't have to be an engaged conversation. And I'm talking about, this can even be with people around the Thanksgiving table. Dad, I have a different point of view. Maybe I don't have the energy or space to get into it with you right now. But I think that these are real practical things that I believe that can make a difference. So, but we also do have to learn about other intersections. We need to hear from people. So even in media, have you read a book from someone who actually has a different identity from you? You know, have you read an Afro-Latina artist? You know, listen to the music of an Afro-Latina artist. Have you read from a queer author? You know, there are things that can be done that I think that we need to expand upon that lift up, honor, and validate the diversity of the experiences that we have.
Beautiful. Trish?
I love that. It's a hard pill to swallow, to read things that you disagree with or to listen to news you may find just offensive in some regards, but it is
Or
important
painful,
to do.
trauma.
Right? Right. Trauma filled and triggering on many levels, but it's important to do. For me, really, intersectionality means also being an ally, but also creating space for people to be themselves so that they can show up authentically as who they are in any space. So I try to create, whether it's with clients, whether it's internally, with my colleagues and the work that I do for our organization, it's how am I allowing people to show up as who they are and not just have a seat at the table, but do they have a voice here? Creating that space and creating that opportunity for them to use and to share that voice, to share their experiences that may be different from mine, even though they may look like me.
Right.
And that's what's key. And so for me, that is it. Being an ally, it does mean standing in the gap. It does mean being a voice there, whatever it is you're saying, but being that voice in the room when they're not present. We've all been in those rooms when people are talking about others. And if they're talking about others when you're in the room, best be assured that they're talking about you when you're not.
You better believe
And
it.
so being that in that room is important to make sure that we are creating safe spaces for all of us. If we're in the room or if we're down the street around the corner. So for me, that's what it means. And none of us, as you said, are one thing. We're one of many things, and oftentimes we're the only one of several in rooms.
That part.
So-
That part. You know, it's so important, and I tend to like co-conspirator as well a little bit more. So that's just a little more action filled.
That's right.
That accomplice.
Standing
Yeah.
in the gap.
Yeah.
Yes, you say beautifully, Trish. So for me, you know, and I do the work as well. I consider myself a co-conspirator to the LGBTQ plus community, and yet I still don't know even close to enough. So that's a part of, you know, kind of really being true to the intersectionality work, is also making space for our own learning. As you say, we're all on a journey. So I have the great privilege of having one of my dearest personal friends, but also a mentor to me and a teacher in this work of intersectionality around Black and LGBTQ plus, Dr. David Johns, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Yes. And Dr. David Johns has just taught me so much around just small things, verbiage, you know. So I am a media personality. I host a podcast. I host the news. So often on my Holding Court podcast with Ebony K. Williams, that can be downloaded wherever you get your podcast. We drop new episodes every Wednesday.
I love it.
I love it.
I would say often, ladies and gentlemen, or men and women, and my brothers and
right.
sisters, and David lovingly called me in, not out, but
Yes.
called me in, and said, "My beloved sister Ebony, I want you to think about non-binary individuals when you use that verbiage, and I want you to think about what it could look like if you say men, women, and non-binary identifying individuals." A call up, you know. So I just really want to talk about how important it is to have those people in your life. That you know, my Afro-Latina friends. One of my co-hosts on the or colleagues rather at the Griot, Natasha Alford, a very proud Afro-Latina woman who does the education of that. So I just want to thank you both. I have so enjoyed being in dialogue with you and sisterhood with you both. This is very fantastic information. We all need to do it. We all need to be more vigilant in recognizing our allies, our co-conspirators, organizations, whether they be government, I love that, media, nonprofit, or corporate sector. And how are we discerning authenticity from performance? The Greater Washington Urban League recognizes those who champion equity and whose efforts consistently, that's that word, make progress. On that, we want to welcome Chief Administrative and Financial Officer, Kimberly Corbin.
Ladies, I can't say enough about how refreshing it is to start the day with such a beautiful set of women, a beautiful set of African American women, with a heartfelt message that is going to send us and our audience to another level of intersectionality, inclusion, truth, and healing. So thank you.